Good evening. Welcome to the July 6, 2020 Upper Providence Township Board of Supervisors Workshop meeting. This is a partial Zoom meeting, and it's a partial in-house meeting. We're socially distanced with the board members only up here, and in the audience, for those of you at home, we have staff and advisors, our engineers and whatnot in the audience. We will move to Mr. Tieperman. Do you want to give an introduction to what we're
Yes,
doing?
the way our workshop's going to be organized tonight is we're going to start with just a high-level revenue expenditure report. Richard's Livergood, our finance director, has put together some graphs, which just to give you a snapshot of where we are. This is as of the end of May, right, Rich? Okay, so this is going to give you a good snapshot of where we are, revenues and expenditures as of May. Then we're going to transition into discussing with Amy Schlesinger. The main purpose for tonight's meeting is to discuss a possible refinancing of our existing debt, looking into some possible new money issues, and then we're going to round out the workshop by having just a first kickoff discussion with department heads on major projects that they foresee in the next 2 or 3 years, what possible projects we might want to include in a money issue. And in addition to that I've come up with a ranking scheme that I think would be a good tool for the board as we move forward. We're going to have more projects than we do money, and it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to try to find a way to rank these and prioritize these so we can make some educated decision on how we finance certain things, when we finance, what we finance. So, and then I'm going to try to keep this no more than a 2-hour workshop. So,
And this is a workshop meeting, so we won't be making any decisions. We'll discuss. This meeting's designed to get an in-depth, have an in-depth discussion. Our chairperson, Helene Kelsey's on an airplane coming back from the West Coast, so storms here tonight won't allow her to be here. But it's really to discuss items more in depth.
mm-hmm. That's correct. I'm going to move on, and the first one is our finance report. And Rich, you're on.
Okay. I'd like to begin by thanking all the departments for their assistance to the finance department during 2020. We've had some transitions to our team in recent years, and township staff has helped us fill in the gaps. Our teamwork here is exemplary, and stakeholders should be proud of the way we help each other and go the extra mile to get the job done. I'd like to begin by reviewing our most significant revenue sources to show where we stand in 2020 while we try to determine the impact of the coronavirus.
Yeah. Thanks. Rich, if you could speak just a little slower. Coming out of the mask, it's kind of muffled.
Okay.
So thanks.
You can have the next slide, Tim.
What's that?
Next slide, please.
There you go.
As this pie graph indicates, the most significant revenue is our earned income tax. The remainder of these slides will show how the township has performed in the collection of these major revenue sources.
Do you want to go over the graph a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Go over the percentages in the graph?
Yeah, the earned income tax is 54% of our revenue, and then the other 46% is made up of the local service tax, which is 5%, real estate transfer tax, the real estate tax, other revenues, and building permits. And as we go over each slide, I'll discuss the percentages. Next slide, please. The first revenue slide shows the difference in earned income tax for 2019 versus 2020, broken out by months. The earned income tax, as I mentioned, makes up 54% of our budget. And although the chart shows some equal and opposite variation in April and May, the grand total for 2019 and 2020 are pretty much on par, the difference being less than $9,000. The true impact of the coronavirus on this and other income sources will not be truly known until the end of August or so, when the second quarter returns are processed by Berkheimer. Next slide, please.
So just, if I could just dovetail a little bit on this, is as of now, we haven't seen any market decrease and our earned income tax as of May. What Richard was explaining is that sometimes earned income tax collections lag. So if there's going to be any significant hit in that revenue, we'll probably see it in the next couple of months. But right now, we're in pretty good shape.
The local service tax is actually higher in 2020 than it was in 2019. And the difference in the EIT and the LST over the last 2 years is nearly a wash, as the combined total is actually $3,000 higher this year. The local service tax makes up about 5% of our operating revenues. Next slide. This slide shows the 2011 through 2019 actual and the 2020 projected revenues for EIT and LST. Both figures have increased fairly consistently, as you can see, over that 10-year time period. And I used June of 2019 and through May of 2020 to project the revenues for this year to be conservative. But you can see there's a steady increase, especially in the earned income tax. Next slide, please. The real estate transfer tax makes up 6% of our operating revenues. Although the first quarter is stronger in 2020 than in 2019, and the overall revenue is up, the second quarter is down, and May and June this year, as you would suspect. The trend of lower revenues may continue in July when we receive our June 2020 report for real estate transfer tax later this month. Next. The real estate tax makes up about 14% of our operating budget, and the building permits about 3%. After speaking with our tax collector, Julie Mullen, and comparing revenues to budget, we believe that we've collected about 96% as of the end of May and 99% as of the end of June, with the potential to collect about $25,000 more in 2020. As for the building permits, they've reduced quite a bit from 2019, and after speaking with Jeff, Grace, and Brian, we cannot predict an uptick in this revenue as a catch-up for the first half of the year. Overall, these 5 revenues make up about 4/5 of our total operating revenues for the year. Our overall revenue position is very close to 2019 and 2020, so we could absorb some potential losses as a result of coronavirus. The bottom part of the page shows the departmental expenses, which are slightly lower where I would expect them to be by this time of the year, especially in recreation where social distancing has hampered our programs. Otherwise, the overall expenditures of 44% are below in 2020 as they were 51% in 2019. I'd also like to add that I was an employee here in 2008 and 2009, and the township really had no material effect in downturn in revenues during that time. That concludes my report.
Is there anything else?
That's the highlight.
So the total, though, Richard, I know you gave 5 departments, but the total we're about even right now as far as year-to-date with 2019?
The expenditures were higher, but there was some more transfers in 2019 than 2020. But for operating expenditures, they're practically the same.
All right.
And Richard, there's a lot of one-time expenditures that we do at the beginning of the year. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, well, they'd be consistent for both years.
Okay.
The police pension plan where we transfer the money in early in the year. Transfers for capital expenditures often happen at the beginning of the year. So there's no material differences there.
Mr. Vice Chair, we'll get these graphs out and
Okay.
and we'll have more follow-ups and discussion, but we wanted to at least give you something on what our statistics are showing.
Okay.
I'm going to move on now to our financial advisor report. Jamie, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, turning it over to you, and just let me know when you want me to switch the slides.
Sure. Hold on. I'm just pulling it up on my computer so I can see it. You can turn to the next slide. I'll give a brief update on the market itself, which I think is kind of interesting from a finance side of things. I think Richard, which he didn't point out, and I'm sure he will mention at some point, what we found is interest rates have dropped pretty dramatically. And in 2008 and 2009, when the recession hit, interest rates were, at zero or pretty darn close to that for a long period of time from an interest earning perspective. Well, that also dovetails with how the capital markets are looking these days, with the Fed doing the things they need to do to keep the economy going. They've dropped interest rates to zero essentially, and that has dropped borrowing rates as well. Outside of a slow, probably a month-long investor droppage in the municipal bond market, we've seen things kind of roar back, and we found both the bond market and even the bank loan market, depending on where you go, has been pretty active and very, very strong. Most investors that were sitting on their hands back in March are kind of back and looking to try to find some strong investments, and certainly from an investment side, this township is in a good place. So should the township move forward with any transaction, whether it's just a refinancing or borrowing some additional funds, I think we'll find strong interest in our debt and really, really low interest rates. So if you want to turn, if you're on the page that shows the graph, that really dovetails with what I described. The current market itself, outside of a major increase that we saw due to the fact that there were no investors around St. Patrick's Day, we've essentially gone back to near historic lows, both on the short end of the yield curve as well as the long end. I think we found a good sweet spot, somewhere within 10 to 20 years at this point, and we're finding that the interest rates are within under 2% fixed in that period of time. So really, really strong, and obviously that helps us when you're paying interest, when you're paying much lower interest rates. I'll briefly just describe what we have. You can turn to the next slide, by the way. It should say topics of discussion, and there should be 3 bullet points. I can't see the screen because when I'm talking, it only shows my name, so hopefully that's what you're seeing. Ultimately, the township has one issue outstanding. It is a bank loan from 2017, and we took that bank loan out right after tax reform. So I know there's maybe 1 or 2 supervisors that were on the board at the time. Right after tax reform, the market was a little in flux with the bond side of things, as investors were trying to get their footing, deciding how the tax reform meant to them. So we were able to utilize a bank loan as what we call a drawdown bank loan, where we borrowed close to $8.5 million or so, and those funds were used potentially for a number of projects. We locked in an interest rate of 2.5% fixed until May of 27, and then the rate would reset at a percentage of Wall Street Journal Prime with a maximum rate of 4.75. And where that loan really provided value was the township had a number of capital projects they were planning on using the funds for, and we shifted some things over a little bit, and ultimately now the plan is to utilize much of those funds for the emergency services building, and you didn't use those funds all at one time, so we didn't pay much interest expense for a couple of years or so. At this point, the township has approximately $6.2 million available to them from that loan itself. But the total balance of that loan is a little over $8 million, and you'll continue to pay principal down over time with a final maturity in 2032. Given where the market is, even though the bank loan was quite strong when we did it in 2017, interest rates are just at the bottom at this point. So if the township is considering doing anything, and even if you weren't going to do additional new money, my recommendation would be to proceed and refinance this debt. One, we would be able to lock in an interest rate for the full term, which is of course very important to remove any interest rate risk. And 2, there's just the underlying interest rates would just be better. So we believe we could save several $100,000 net of all costs once we go through that process. As Tim and Richard mentioned, there are some capital needs that the township's going to start to consider over the course of time. Based on some estimates that were provided me by administration, we're looking at a potential emergency services building costing close to $13 million. There's a fire truck purchase and some road projects that in total are about $1.3 million. So in total, over the next few years, you could need close to $14 million or so. As I mentioned, you have about $6.2 million available to you. Obviously, that is what you'd first use as part of the cash. But clearly, if when rates are this low, it certainly makes sense to probably dovetail some additional funds for a future project. And my job would be to help structure that and make sure the payments meet the useful life of the projects, as well as make it easily paid back by the township, and we'll work through with that with the township at this point. I did put together some numbers, which I'll go through in the next few pages. But again, overall, I think it's a good time to consider these type of projects. My viewpoint is we'd probably do two separate financings. And the reasons why we would do that is, number one, we want to do one transaction that would include the refinancing, which again has a balance of about $8 million. And that would again allow us to lock in those interest rates. And second, we'd probably borrow some additional funds for some of those projects. One thing I'd consider is doing a total project or total borrowing amount of about $10 million. And for anyone that remembers, there's some value to that in the municipal bond market. By having something $10 million or less, that is considered bank qualified. And that does two things for us as an issuer. One, it gets us a little lower interest rates than anything over $10 million. And two, it provides, if we do a bond issue, the call provision, meaning the option to refinance in the future, would be only 5 years. Those two things provide some value to the township to do about a $10 million issue. And second, I think it's more important, this does give the township some additional time to decide how much the projects are really going to cost. And essentially what we can do is a cleanup issue sometime next year, whether that's another $3 to $5 million. We'll see what that looks like as you decide which projects you ultimately want to finance. But my viewpoint is let's take care of the refinancing and maybe gather another $1.7 million for some additional capital, and that should give you close to 7.9, almost $8 million available for these particular projects. And from there we can make some decisions. I'll stop for a second. Does everybody have any questions, at least on the first concepts?
Yeah, are you talking about an additional 10 million on top of refinancing the debt from 2017, the 6,200,000?
No, in this case right now, my thought is we would just do a total financing of $10 million this year, which most of it would be related to the refinancing. So again, about $8-ish million would be for the refinancing, and the balance would be additional funds for projects. So that would essentially provide about, give or take, about $8 or $9 million, available for projects until we make another decision if you wanted to borrow some additional money next year. So again, most of this for this year would be refinancing.
Jamie, are we still on the right slide?
Yeah, if you can turn to the next page. This should be just I did discuss this briefly, but this is the snapshot of what your debt looks like currently. Right now, we're paying about $900,000 per year in annual debt service. And based on the structure that we had last time, and there's a variety of reasons why we structured this way, the debt does drop off over a course of time. Eventually it drops off to about $600,000 by 2029, and then it gets completely paid off by 2032. But again, in total, there's just under $8 million of outstanding principal based on the interest rates that we assumed at that time. You turn to the next page, Tim. This should be a page that is called Financing Scenarios. It says multi-step process. So this essentially summarizes at least my initial plan on how I think we could take on some additional debt and where your debt would look like once everything is all said and done based on some assumed interest rates. There's different sections of this. There's a blue, a red, and a black section, and then a purple section. I'm just going to talk about the starting point, which is column 7, which is the budgeted debt service. if you go back to that previous page, which you don't need to, that is essentially what your budgeted debt service looks like on the $8 million that we took out with the original bank loan. The blue, which is shown on column 8, this is the assumed interest rate savings that we could generate based on somewhat conservative interest rates right now. I believe that net of all costs, the township would save a little over $200,000 by refinancing the debt. This makes the assumption that the township would reduce the interest rate to about 2% from what you currently have. So we remove any variable rate risk and lock in and approximately save around $200,000. So that's kind of the starting point here. From there, as I mentioned, I'd suggest that we borrowed a little bit more to make the total borrowing about $10 million. So again, that would provide about $1.7 million of additional funds that can be used for some capital projects. Again, based on how we structured this, it would just make the impacted total debt service be about $940,000 once this debt is added on. So again, in total, you'd have about $10 million of total outstanding debt, and you'd pay a little over $940,000 over about a 12-year period. But again, that would give you, about 7.9, almost $8 million of funds for projects. Then the idea would be sometime next year, once you made further decisions, if you were to borrow the balance of the funds necessary to do the close to $14 to $15 million worth of projects, then we'd borrow some additional funds in 2021. We'd structure that a little bit differently, where we'd amortize it over a little bit longer period of time. But you can see, if you look at column 12, your debt would be completely paid off in 2040. And your overall future payments would be about $1.1 million in the initial amounts, and then drop off a little bit to about $900,000 thereafter. But this again would give you enough money to do everything that was on that list that I described earlier. Certainly, if the township, pulls some of these off, or the project costs are a little bit lower, certainly we'll adjust the borrowing amount in the purple column. But again, just for budgeting purposes, at least we wanted to show you what the impact would be from a debt service side. Again, I think the key here is, step one, you'd save some money by refinancing and borrowing some additional funds. And again, by the time we're ready to do some more, we could look at step 2, which is the purple section. Outside of that, again, this was just more of a generic overview of at least the way I'm thinking about things. Should the board decide to do something, if there's some future questions on structuring or how we might want to consider this, obviously we can rerun some more analysis, and hopefully I'll be physically at a future meeting where I'll be able to talk a little bit more in detail. But again, I think for purposes of tonight's discussion, this gives you a good snapshot of the way things could look.
Jamie, can you hear me? This is Tim. One reason we were having this discussion tonight is I think we were looking at scheduling a refinancing ordinance, because whenever you refinance a bond issue, you have to, it requires an ordinance through our bond council. We were looking at doing that in August, am I correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the reason we're having this workshop tonight is to have at least some discussion for the board to make some action to authorize the ordinance at our next regular meeting in anticipation. You kind of need that done in July, and then we would actually have the ordinance hearing in August. Allows the time for advertisement?
That's correct. Yeah, traditionally, unlike traditional ordinances, because this falls under the Local Government Unit Debt Act, you would need to advertise it no earlier than 3 days before the board meeting, but no later than 30. It's 3 or 30 days, so it's not a full month. But obviously, the action just to decide to move forward but we need tonight. If the board wants to borrow some additional funds, which I think you can make a decision, that would need to be part of that ordinance as far as one of the purposes. But if we're just going to do the refinancing, which is okay, we can just have the ordinance, just talk about the refinancing only. But obviously that was one of the points of the conversation for tonight, is if you want to decide to borrow any additional money, and that would be the time to do it. so you don't have to pay cost of issuance more than once.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Jamie? I'm sure we'll have plenty more to discuss. Okay. Thank you, Jamie.
You're welcome, everybody.
All right. And then the next item on the agenda is to review possible capital projects for inclusion in the new bond issue.
Mr. Chairman, I just as far as full disclosure, we could easily have a 2-hour discussion on either one of these items tonight. So our purpose is not to get into a lot of, we want to just cover some of the department head issues, but I just want to put these items in particular up that's been out there in very high level discussions, but we have absolutely no idea what the cost impacts are on if we were looking at anything dealing with substantive library services, anything dealing with our future rec center. No, we've had discussions on the Taylor Farm. We're currently in the process of completing our park master plan, so I think we're going to have some options to look at. The stormwater management projects and the Black Rock fire stations are all on my list for further analysis. It's just that it's too premature to put any hard dollars on these, but it's something I want to put there on everybody's radar screen that they're out there for further discussion. Some of these items would require some revenue sources, which we still haven't resolved as far as the stormwater. And I'm going to recommend that we have another meeting with the municipal authority to try to resolve some of those issues. And we'll touch upon some of these, but I just wanted to put these particular items out there. Still require more discussion, probably separate workshops themselves. One other item I think I sent out with my manager's report, and as we continue to look at a lot of projects with pretty hefty price tags, with limited financial resources, I think it's incumbent upon the board to try to find a system, a good system that you can review and rank them accordingly based on certain criteria. What I gave out is a summation of what I've gathered from other towns. Some towns put higher weights on certain factors. I tried to take the best elements of some of these policies and put them in a document. So before we really get too involved, what's worked well for me in the past is to have each supervisor go through independently, look at the projects and rank them how you feel that they should be ranked according to those policies and criteria. Staff can give you the feedback also and try to have a good 365 review on it. But Mr. Vagnozzi, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but basically here's the chart that I came up with. There's like 10 criteria that you can look at. And I've given equal weights to a lot of these projects. It's not probably something you want to apply to every single project, but when you look at certainly multi-million-dollar projects, it's probably worth going through an exercise like this.
Can I ask you, what's your thought process with these projects, which we're all familiar with most of these, but the bond issue or any issue we do, my belief or opinion is that they're for big ticket items. That would be for a building or for a large project, as opposed to some of the things that I see on the list, replacing a dump truck or something. We still have a capital budget inside our budget, correct? So,
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page, that we're not looking at replacing a 2008 Mack truck for $200,000 to be included in any kind of bond issue, right?
No. This is kind of a capital project with a combination of refinancing, debt service, and the capital project itself, which we're kind of segueing into.
Right.
Now.
And the other thing I'd like to look at, and Tom, our Director of Public Works, we've been paving roads using the bank loan, banknote lately. So, and I know we had the liquid fuels. I'd just like to see where we are with the liquid fuels. And I know we were playing catch-up with some of the road projects because we got behind. Not for now, but for in the coming weeks, if we could understand if we stop using bond issue money or the bank loan to pave our streets and work off the liquid fuels, at what point do we start to not need that? Because I really don't want to see us borrow funds to pave our roads if we can use our liquid fuels, or reduce the amount of it, okay?
What we've been doing has been using, I guess, 650,000 for number of liquid fuels every year, and then putting another $650,000 of our money in there, which usually lets us accomplish 4 miles a year, which is my goal. That puts us around the township in 20 years. And we're going to have to be well for us at that rate.
Okay.
So it's like 650 and 650.
Okay, so that's liquid fuels and money that we have operating money.
Yes, we do 2 projects.
Right.
One is strictly liquid fuels, the other one is
Right, but Mr. Tieperman, we have used some of the banknote, at least a year or so ago, we used some of the banknote money.
I think we used some of it. That
Yeah,
was
I just
the,
don't, I want to, I try not to do that if we don't have to in the future, that's all. I just want to limit any bond we issue or we request or we purchase, that it's for these big ticket items, whether it's the firehouse or Taylor Farm or
and a
something
good rule
like
of thumb on any bond issue, anything with a life cycle of a very minimum 10 years, but usually 15 or 20 years is the goal.
that. Okay.
Very briefly, I'm going to go through each of the departments and just kind of give you a perspective of where I think we are as far as capital. And I'm going to start with the low-hanging fruit. Administration and finance, we foresee no major projects or anything of a bond-related nature. We may be way down the road, maybe looking at updating our finance software and some other projects, but any significant costs we have are usually less than 5 years, have less than a 5-year life, or included in our regular budget. So the good news is we have 0 projects on the horizon for administration and finance. Police service, I spoke to Chief Toomey. The only they have their new facility, and they've gotten some other equipment. They got the Faro system and some other technologies, but I think generally, other than police car replacements, we have no major capital needs for the police department. So I just wanted to put that out there. Planning and economic development. Jeff, I don't know if you have access to a microphone, but I think a lot of the big projects that you've been dealing with right now, you're in the middle of. The comprehensive plan update, we're working on the park plan, master plan, the walk works. All these are going to be consolidated into one final document.
The plan is to consolidate the walkworks, complete streets, the park master plan, the comprehensive plan, and essentially the comprehensive plan. And that may identify some capital projects, but we're still sort of in the planning stages, so we don't necessarily have them for this meeting. Other than that, we have some trail plans I think we'll talk about.
Tuck that under parks.
In,
So.
in other departments, but generally those are the only capital improvements, the capital expenditures we have now for planning and zoning.
Thank you, Jeff. We're going to move it now into what I call our capital-intensive departments. Talk a little bit about fire and emergency services, and we've already had. I think most of you were in that scoping workshop with the architect on fire. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to formally meet Mike Rissell. He's kind of the deputy chief, and Dan is on a well-deserved vacation, but he's going to be the proxy tonight and to go over some of the highlights of the fire and emergency services. All the board members have a copy of what Dan gave me, and you don't have to go into a lot of details, but maybe just give the thinking that went in there, and then we'll move on to, I think next we'll move into public works and then parks. You probably need a mic. We have a hand mic? Yeah.
Good evening. It's nice to meet all of you finally in person instead of Zoom. Our biggest expenses, of course, are the upcoming building that all of you are aware of. I think all of you were at the last meeting that we discussed with the architect and the cost of that. Going forward, we know that we have the grant that we put in for the additional 7 firefighters. We won't hear that until at least August at this point. If it does, it will affect our 2021 budget because there will be some minor expenses that we've discussed with you in the past. The cost to house the firefighters overnight and some additional gear. But that's offset greatly by the amount of money that we would save with the addition of the 3 years of the funding for the 7 firefighters. BlackRock has in the past housed a boat that was in their Montclair station. They've unsuccessfully tried with 4 different vendors to get it fixed or repaired. They've been unable to do that. So we included in the budget for next year for a boat. There's a rescue boat and an inflatable boat. The rescue boat is the one with the motor that you see going up and down the Schuylkill. The inflatable boats are more of a walk-in type boat that we use when we have situations exactly like today, where rain comes down and inundates intersections or minor creeks go up, and we really just have to walk in and rescue people and walk back out. And that's what we would use the inflatable boats for. So that was the $50,000 that we budgeted for next year. We felt that that was, with the reduction of Montclair or BlackRock's boat, we really felt that there's an immediate need, more immediate need for that than not. We've been working on a drone program that would be encompassing with the water rescue program, but we've also worked to try and manage that in conjunction with the police department that would be used for a multitude of investigative tools, searches, anything. Quite frankly, we could use it anywhere in the township. Parks and Rec could use it, the road crew, Public Works could use it any time that anybody would need any kind of aerial overview. We would cross-train members both with the police department, the fire department, and BlackRock. So we would be able to provide the services at any time that was necessary for the drone, whenever it would be needed. And then, of course, we needed something to tow the boat with, so we included a cost for the vehicle to be able to tow that. Primarily why we just can't tow it with the pickup truck is we haven't found, but the water rescue companies that we've spoken with have all informed us that on a day where it's really nice out, it's not a problem for them to gear up and put all their equipment on outside, but when it's wintertime or cold or they've been out on the water, they need an enclosed area where they can protect and give protection to the rescuers who are putting on their dry suits or taking off their dry suits and getting preparation to get in and out of the boat. So that's why the vehicle was included there, because it also gives us that ability to protect the rescuers as they prepare to get into the boat. Moving forward, 2022, the 2006 Pierce that the township owns that is presently stationed at the BlackRock firehouse will need replacement. Our intent is right now we have one of the white engine and the red engine across the street here. The one's that's the twin almost to the 2006 that's staged or parked at the BlackRock station. We're doing a study to determine which one would make more sense to keep as our reserve backup or supplement engine. Now, the way it works today and will continue to work is there's BlackRock firefighters that are closer to here than they are to the BlackRock station, so they will come here and take the white engine that's parked across the street as an engine that they're also responding with if they're available to come out. And we're going to determine which one makes more sense to keep, and then in replacement of the engine that's at the BlackRock station, we would do the same thing. One of them would remain as the second engine. Whichever one is best to keep would be the backup engine that we keep. The township also owns the tower that's parked at the BlackRock station. After we've been using it, after that's been in use for several years now, we've realized that it isn't really designed for what we need it for in the township. It's larger than makes it practical to use, and At some point, there's going to be a need to replace that. There's still probably, according to the manufacturer or the salesperson for Pierce, we should be expected to get about 50% of the value of that truck when it was purchased. So we would be looking at between $50,000 and $60,000 right now if we sold it. So the value in selling it earlier rather than later is higher, which gives us less cost to purchase a new aerial.
You mean $500,000?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. much higher than mine. So the thought process was to replace it earlier while there's still value in the sale of it, rather than wait and when there's no value. It helps offset the purchase of the new ladder. We have a fire prevention prop. It's the big blow-up house that you may have seen on multiple times where they've been out doing different fire prevention programs. Wear and tear takes its time and toll on that, and we've put in there to replace that. It's been very successful, and we want to continue that program moving forward, and it's just simply a replacement for that project. 2023, we'll continue with this. 2023, the things that we've identified, some of them are minor. One of them is a staff vehicle that needs to be replaced. The other one then is the consideration that we talked about, or that the manager talked about earlier with the replacement of the Black Rock Station. And there's been talks that have been in the past about how that has to be handled. It's in the budget because there's a long-range plan that needs to be addressed. I'm really not certain, or I wasn't involved, obviously, in any of the previous talks, but we put it there because we know that there's a need for the replacement of the building. There's a need for housing down there. There's a need for bunk rooms. There's
That was one of the topics that we'll have further discussion at a future meeting.
And then in 2024, again, simple things. Another vehicle that would need, staff vehicle that would need replacement. We are on the turnout gear, the equipment that we wear, needs to be replaced according to NFPA on a regular cycle, and the $115,000 keeps us in that replacement program. And then, of course, the largest expenditure there would be the construction of the training building at $650,000, which was originally proposed with the construction of the new building and is being allocated room and space at the new fire station emergency service building. But we're looking at 2024 as the beginning of construction for that.
Very good, thank you.
Okay.
Any questions?
Anybody?
Moving on now to Public Works. This is kind of a two-part. Tom, you have your list of projects that you can go over. And then Casey, I also have a sheet that you gave us back in November, whether that's been updated, but you can kind of give an idea. I know some of those are grant projects. But I'll start with Tom. Go ahead.
I guess you all have a copy of my capital projects and equipment list. Tindy Run, we're pretty sure that's going to happen in 2021 and 22. Pleasant Lane should happen in 2021, along with Spring Mill Estates. Yerkes Road Sewer, we're just not really doing much with that at this point. Greenwood Avenue Sewer, 2022. I do have people along that stretch of Greenwood Avenue that have asked to hook up to the system, so I'd like to see that move forward. The two trucks I have in there, they just basically are for the sewer department, so they could be used with sewer money for that. Stormwater projects, we have the MS4 basin at Route 422 and 29 to collect sediment for our MS4 program. I believe we could probably do that in 2021. That's a cost of $700,000 for that project. Caroline and Carmen storm sewer replacement in 2022. That old galvanized pipes, that system's really bad in there. We really need to get that done. No later than 2022. It really should get done. The storm boxes are falling apart. It's just in terrible condition. The other miscellaneous stormwater repairs are ones that we do in-house every year, and materials that we need to do those projects. That's ongoing. Some years we spend that, some years we don't spend as much. Other projects, Walnut Street reconstruction project, that would be for, I believe it's the first, I think it's 800 feet or 800 or 1,200 feet of street. It will go all the way down to pretty much where the church is on Walnut Street, and that would be new curbs, sidewalks, and everything else involved with it. That's in really bad shape down there. That's a project that would really work well, I guess, with the Walnut Street realignment and putting them, out in 2021. The Ashenfelder Road culvert replacement, Bill Dingman's been working on that. That should come in somewhere around $300,000. That's another necessary project as far as I'm concerned. Project A is always our liquid fuels project, and that's normally around $650,000 a year, and that's pretty much what we get for liquid fuels. And then we usually do a Project B, which would be capital money that from us, which is like $650,000 to $700,000 a year. The Bechtel Road realignment, east and west, I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but Bill provided us with numbers for that. I put trails on here, but I think there's 2 or 3 of us that have trails on here, so I can defer that, I guess, behind me. The other thing, buildings, public works expansion in the future. We're evaluating our needs for space now, trying to get our equipment inside of a building. Basically, when that building was built, it was built for like 6 employees, and we have 14 guys working out of that building, and the equipment for 3 different departments stored in that. And we just need room. We need room in the future here, badly. Other equipment, this is just trucks that need to get replaced over the years. Generally, what we do is our equipment, our small trucks depreciate in 5 to 7 years. We try to keep the small pickup trucks for 7 years, sometimes up to 10 years. And then our large dump trucks depreciate out around 12 years, and we try to keep those or get rid of those between 12 and 15. Most of the time, they're around 15 years when we get rid of those. So that's all I have.
Bill, is there anything else you want to add to his list? Some of those are no required. Okay, go ahead. Either one of you. Yes, go ahead.
So I think you all have in front of you a table that I prepared at the end of last year. These were prioritized capital improvement projects that came out of the traffic impact study, the Act 209 study for the township. Few of them anticipated years of construction were the first 2. Signalization of Black Rock, Hollow, Troutman Road. That project has not been started yet, but that project was anticipated that if it was completed, it would be done with funds out of the Act 209 reserves. That project can be started and move forward if the board decides to do that. Second project was the Dow Chemical Bike Lane project. I think we decided as a group earlier this year that that project was going to be put on hold. And if another location was found, we would consider that. The Bridge Street Jacobs Walnut project is currently under design and in process with the township. That's going back to a 2018 multimodal grant award. As that project moves through and gets toward construction date, which we anticipate could be as early as next year, there could be a potential with the construction costs of that project could exceed the monies that we have, but we won't know until the project is finalized with PennDOT. But that's on schedule for 2021. 2022, we were anticipating going after a Green Light Go project. Everyone knows Green Light Go is on hold right now. We don't know if that program is going to come back. So that is a point of discussion with the township. That was essentially signalizing that intersection at Green Tree Road and Egypt Road. We anticipate that cost to be around $340,000. The next project for 2022 is, I would say, sort of on track to happen in that year or thereabouts. If approved, the project for Silver Rhino would improve the intersection of Route 29 and Hopwood Road. The developer at this point is funding 100% of the improvements that we know of. There might be a little bit of assistance that we may need to provide them from a township standpoint in terms of right-of-way to squeeze in the trail that we need to squeeze down all of Hopwood Road. But they have agreed to extend the culvert on Hopwood Road as we've asked them to do, and do all the improvements along 29. So that's moving forward, and we anticipate that they're going to be before the Planning Commission this Wednesday, just in a couple days, for the first time in several months to talk about both projects, both the Hopwood Road. Oh, just Yerkes Road? Just the Yerkes Road portion of it. Lewis Road, Bechtel Road, and Fruit Farm Road, that's a signalization project that's out till 2023. Again, that was going to use Act 209 funds. And then kind of to dovetail into that project, we were going to see where the 188 Bechtel Road land development application was going. They're also coming before the Planning Commission this week on Wednesday, and if they get their recommendation, they'll be before the board pretty soon. The last two are roundabouts, Lewis and Vaughn, and Black Rock, Drebelbus, and Second Avenue. The Lewis Road Vaughn project, the board's well aware of. We submitted for a multi-modal fund grant with PennDOT. We're waiting to hear. We heard from PennDOT's mouth that they are not canceling the multimodal grant awards for this round. That doesn't mean that everybody that applied will get one, but the good news is they're moving forward with that program. It could be reshaped a little bit going into the next round, but we are going to submit for a similar grant through DCED to do the engineering and have that 100% funded so that the township would not have to pay for the engineering at all. And then the last project is kind of out there, and we'll decide maybe a year from now, the next summer, how we might pursue a grant for that project. There are some short-term improvements that can be done in the interim by Public Works with signing and striping that's before the township, but that's been put on the shelf to hold back on expenditures. So that's a little bit about that table. You have any questions?
I have a couple questions. How much do we have in the Act 209 fund? I'm not expecting you to know. Do we know that? But you said that we may have the money for the signalization at Troutman, and
Yeah, I believe that you would have that, about that amount, but
Okay.
I would not know for sure. That would
Richard,
have to
can
be a
you-
Rich question.
can we
Rich,
find out how we're making on that?
can we check
total?
that? Yeah.
It's about 13 million.
How much?
Around 13 million?
No, Act 209, the Act 209,
I don't think we have much yet. We have not.
but it's coming.
We have commitments. We have commitments from a lot of projects that would total that
We're
amount.
kind of in the lag between when we adopted it and when the plan gets to the point of being.
So we've
Accounts
kind of,
receivable
we've kind of
versus-
accrued it, so we know it's coming.
Correct.
Yeah, we could, I could sit down with Casey and figure that out.
All right.
Figure that amount out.
Yeah.
once it's queued up.
All right, and then we're basically, we're not even dealing with the Dow Chemical bike lanes. 'cause
No.
We didn't want to do that. And then the Bridge Street, the thing that's on Mr. Pearson's
It's on his
horizon,
hot
right?
list.
It's coming, John, it's coming, right? We're getting to that. So, but that's already in motion, though. We have funding for that, correct?
You have funding for that, and the only thing that I said was, between the time you got the grant and the time it goes to construction, there may be a difference in construction
There
costs.
might be a delta there, right?
Yeah, there might be a little bit of a delta there, yeah.
Okay.
We'll figure that out when the plans get approved.
All right, and then Hopwood and 29 will be paid for by the developer. I just have a question about the Bechtel and Fruit Farm signalization. Am I missing something? That's a four-way stop sign, isn't it?
This is the one around the curve and further up, so as.
Around
as
the
you
curve?
take the curve, it's just past the curve, it's a, yeah,
So we
four-way
want
stop.
to, we want to realign that whole intersection? I must have missed this one.
No, so what we were talking about was, Bechtel Road is coming through the 188 Bechtel Land Development Project now, and the township has an easement to continue that, to tie that into that
Well, all
road.
right.
And at that point in time, that intersection would end up with a traffic signal where the extension leaves off.
All right, okay.
Yes, you're right, it's a four-way stop right
Yeah, I
now.
don't, so that's a four-way stop now, right? I just don't,
Correct.
I mean, do we have
Correct.
crash, are we, chief, I mean, I don't know of any crash, do we have crashes at that four-way?
So it was, the 10-year projection for that intersection
Okay.
was it was going to meet signal warrants, and so it was recommended in the study. That's why it's out a few
All
years.
right. This is just on the list, that's not something
on the
that's-
list.
That's just not like.
It's like
'cause I would think
low-hanging-
Lewis and Vaughn would be a bigger priority than that.
This is, right, this is like a low-hanging fruit that if you
Okay.
had funding, you
okay.
could do that project, wouldn't require right-of-way and things of
Okay.
that nature.
Okay, I have a question, I just want to jump back to Tom. Liquid fuels, can you tell me exactly what that comes from? And is there a projection or an anticipation that that might drop a little bit because people aren't driving as much?
Liquid fuels is dropping this year. We don't know how much. I'm told it could drop $40,000 a year. But our allotment for the amount of roads that we have in our township, it's funded by PennDOT, is right around $650,000 now. Maybe to be safe, we say it's 610, but I'm doing over. This year we didn't get our 650, or than
And then we use some of the excess oftentimes for road salt. So 650,000 just what we think we may spend from the fund. But then we also use the road salt for when we have excess.
Now, every time we take a new road in this township from a new development, I go ahead and I submit the paperwork to PennDOT, and then we get paid for that road as well. So it's important for me to get those roads, keep updating them every year, make sure that we're adding to that. That every road brings us more money.
Okay, so we get money based on how many roads we have, but the state,
According to our mileage,
Yeah.
according to our mileage, I think we're at 84 miles now, township
Okay.
roads. And
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, I think it's 50% population and then 50% road mileage.
Right.
okay,
Split up amongst the municipalities.
okay, thanks.
And along those lines, though, the price of oil came down, so we got very good rates on our bids this year, didn't we?
We got pretty good rates, yeah, I think, I was happy.
Because liquid asphalt.
Hey, Mike, guys, if I can ask you to use the mic because we're having
All right.
problems.
So liquid
getting-
asphalt price is down.
It is.
All right.
Now, we have to pay them an escalation cost when the price goes up, but this is an unusual year, and I believe they're gonna owe us money
Okay.
for asphalt, for the price of asphalt, so, and that's the first time ever for me.
Okay.
So it'll be interesting to see how that works out.
Lori, the question I have is that money comes from the fuel tax, and as you know, the state has a $3 billion deficit, and my biggest concern is that those revenues stay where they're supposed to go, and that they're not used to close the state. So I guess I'm being a cynic there, but I think it's a concern I have.
So I have a question to Al's point on the Act 209 money. Six out of the 8 projects that Casey just spoke about refer to funding through the Act 209. Act 209 is money that we get from developers for road improvements. Is that correct? Okay, and we're looking over the next 5 years. Do we have that much development we anticipate in the next 5 years to cover the costs of all of these items that you're referring to as far as this Act 209 is concerned? I know nobody knows what that figure is as far as how much money is in there, but with the development that we have coming up, do we have enough money?
I can't speak to exact numbers just because we have looked at the development. In the Act 209 plan, we looked at the potential development of all of the open parcels that are left. And then Casey went through and tabulated how much all the road improvements would cost, and that's how you base the fee for the Act 209. So in a pure mathematics sense, yes, we should. But development doesn't, and road construction don't work in a pure mathematics sense that some development may not come in, some development may come in lighter or heavier than we anticipated in the Act 209 plan. Generally, yes, the Act 209 plan will balance that out, but we won't really know until the rubber hits the road, so to speak, and the development actually comes in. I don't know what the development picture is going to look like after we sort of get through this agenda with the two large apartment buildings and some of the smaller developments we have. I don't know what we're going to be seeing for the next 4 or 5 years. It's kind of just a big open question for everybody right now. If the development doesn't come in, no, we're not going to have the money. If the development comes in, we're going to have the money. So that's the basic formula.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what he just said was, so a lot of these things, John mentioned Act 209 and general funds also. So the Act 209, we feel as though could be used as leverage to do the local match to go after grant money. So you can leverage the money you're getting through Act 209, which is the smaller cost of the project, to leverage the bigger project. And I think we've been successful in some projects already going after grants and doing that. So we anticipate, as long as there's grant programs, in addition to development, we should be able to keep pace with that. And then the last result would be, general funds. We're trying to take advantage and use our money to leverage the grant funds.
It would be nice to it would be nice to know that figure like Al asked for, would help.
Anything else on that?
Bill, anything that you want to add to what maybe Tom said? I know that he talked a lot about projects that you'll be designing, so. Okay. Our last department is Parks and Recreation. I don't think you have any handout from Sue, but I did hand out a rundown of trails that I asked Jeff to put together. As you know, trails has always been one of the board's top objectives, and I asked Jeff to try to give us an idea of what trails can reasonably be done in the next 2 or 3 years and the process that needs to be involved this is something for Jeff and maybe you, Bill. So.
I think if we look at trails sort of as a 2-year cycle, the first year is planning, engineering, acquisition of right-of-way. The second year would be construction, a little bit more of the nitty-gritty details. And if you're looking through the memo here, what we've done is this year we've really focused on engineering and designing the 2 trails that were the highest priority, the Black Rock Trail coming from Black Rock Park down to 113, and the Toll Troutman, the Troutman Road Trail up by Ashenfelter. We're working out those details. I won't go into the details, they're in the memo here. But then what I did is, in working with Sue and talking sort of about what the next priority is for on-road trails. Now, these aren't in-park trails. I'm sure Sue has a lot of ideas for those and priorities for those, but for on-road trails and connecting the trails, if you look at the second page, everything that's in bold, which is 3 different trail sections, I think is what we look at for 2021 and start moving those trails forward. I have original budget estimates in here based off of the 2018 memo, but that's from soup to nuts, from beginning to completion. I think that if we start looking at the Route 29 connection trail along Arcola Road, getting you from Providence Town Center across 29 down to Arcola Road and the Perkiomen Trail, I think that's a high priority, especially with Providence Town Center coming in. They're building a big section of this and sort of coming to us and working with them and getting across 29. Then you have the 113 trail, which would take you from Anderson Farm Park down to Black Rock Road to connect to this park, and then also connecting down through the Upper Schuylkill Valley Park in that area, which would connect the 2 largest parks in the township, and has always been, I think, a high priority, but there's a lot of, it's a complicated process to go through and a lot of right-of-way. So that's why I think if we really need to study it a little bit more than we have up to this point. And then the Schoolhouse Run Trail. Looking at the development that's coming into the planning department over the last year or so, a lot of it has been coming up off of north of Ridge Pike, mostly Greenwood Avenue, some right on Ridge Pike on Main Street, and starting to connect some of the trails and starting to connect some of that part of the township down to the Taylor Farm and down, and once you get to Taylor Farm, connecting it, we're creating a connection from the Taylor Farm property all the way to Anderson Farm Park. So we want to be able to bring those residents down into the meat of the township and connect to some of the things that Perkiomen, maybe some trails up there if we can work with Perkiomen Township. So that's what I see as the three priorities moving forward. Again, to think of it as a 2-year cycle. So next year we would look at it as planning, acquisition, design, and then the year after would be construction where feasible. I think with the, once you get through design and you sort of get shovel ready, it makes it a lot easier to get grants. I think we saw that this year when we had the 2040 grant from Montgomery County. And I think, knock on wood, the DCED grant that Bill put in for the Troutman Farm, hopefully that money hasn't gone into the ether, and hopefully we can get that grant as well. If there's any questions.
That's the trail perspective. Sue, is there any, obviously the big white elephant, the rec center, we're not going to talk about, but if there's any other things on your agenda.
Not right now. We are working on the park master plan, which is going to basically give us a good guideline of what we should be looking at the next few years. A couple projects that we're hoping.
Sue, could you use your mic, please?
Sorry, enough to it. A couple things that we do need to start looking into is our playgrounds and enhancing those, rebuilding them, the addition of possibly the splash pad and the pump track, which is a bike track, as well as a community garden, hopefully over where our Port Providence Park is currently. There are a lot of things in the works at this point in time, but it's all dependent on the park master plan and what that comes up with.
Very good. I think we rounded out all the high-level comments. Mr. Chairman, the last item I have here is the future possible workshops. I think you all received the library report. That's a project and a meeting all of its own. And I've gotten some dates from our library consultants. I was wanting to check to see if any of you are available on any of the nights of the 27th through the 30th. We would like to try to get a workshop scheduled, if you guys can let us know, or let Cheryl know. And there were a number of stormwater projects that Tom talked about, and at our last joint meeting with the authority, I don't think we ever landed as far as what type of revenue source we may want to look at. So before we really get into serious programming of stormwater projects, I think we need another follow-up meeting with the authority. They're meeting on August 6th. Those are the two projects that I'd like to keep on the radar screen.
Okay,
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
okay. Any supervisor comments? Any?
If I may, I'd like to go back to the, to this tower that you're talking about replacing. I was here when we bought that. It was $1 million, I think, when we bought it. And you're going to get rid of that to get what?
What they've learned with using the tower over the last several years is that it doesn't serve the needs as well as they wanted it to. It's larger than is practical to get around the township in the manner that they need it to work. So the thought based on the plan that the fire department is moving forward with as a whole throughout the entire township would be to replace it with a ladder truck that does not have a pump on it and does not have water on it, known as a dry ladder. And the reason that's feasible now where it wasn't in the past is because we know that we're going to have an engine that will always be responding with the career staff that's going to bring water and a pump with it to supply, to be able to pump hose and put water on a fire. So we still need the capabilities of the ladder. The tower, as it sits today, has the capabilities of both doing, being a ladder with a bucket on it, with a pump and water on it. That makes it larger, heavier, and more difficult to maneuver around the township. A dry ladder is easier to maneuver. It doesn't carry the same weight. It has a better turning radius, and with the concept of how we're setting the fire department up, we know that we have the pump and the water coming. So as a team, as a combination of the two vehicles arriving on the fire scene, it gives that same capacity and capability as we have now, but with more maneuverability and a better usage.
How old is the tower truck now?
It's a 2012. It's 2012.
2020.
So it's just roughly 8 years old.
Yes.
I just, you know, like, I have, my concern is that we took the recommendation of whoever was in charge of fire and emergency services back then. We took their recommendation that this was the good thing to purchase and everything else. And now you're telling us that we should get rid of that, and, well, maybe you're not, and maybe you have a apparatus committee that recommended this. My concern is that we're not just jumping and trying to go get the next best thing, you know, like, oh, here comes a new truck down, let's go with this instead of the other one. I just, when somebody recommends something to me, when a fireman recommends that this is a good thing to have, I go, okay, good, we're going to go get this. When now you're coming in and telling me, well, that wasn't such a good idea, now we should have this, now it makes me start to wonder, well, just what do we really need? I'm sorry, I'm not,
No,
I
it's a-
don't mean
it's
to
a-
put you on the, I don't mean to put you, you know,
It's okay, I'm sitting here. It's-
point the finger at you, so to speak,
I
but
understand.
you're sitting here.
And it's a very valid point. And I would, if I was sitting there, in fact, sitting here, I still ask the same question, is why was that designed then, and we're coming back today and saying it doesn't work as well as we thought, as well as they thought that it would? And the simplest answer, because it just doesn't. It wasn't a poor design. It just didn't. It doesn't meet the needs as well as what we feel. And this certainly doesn't just come from me. This also comes from the firefighters at Black Rock, who are the people that are running it. They recognized that it was a larger truck and more difficult to maneuver around the township than I think they anticipated that it would be. So at the time, the circumstances were different, and they certainly needed a ladder truck that had a pump and water on it, which makes it larger, makes it heavier, and makes it a bigger truck. We recognize that we can get a better truck, and it isn't always just the bigger and better thing, because I'm not sure that this is the biggest and best thing. Believe me, there's a lot of big and best things that I think would really be neat to have, and
Well, I guess that's,
this meets the needs based on the engine that we're also purchasing with the staff that we're going to be having in place. So it allows the fire department to purchase, or the township to purchase the truck that isn't the biggest and best. It still is, it's of course the ladder truck, so it does carry an expense with it. But I think as we design it and look at how the system is going to be set up, it will give us the best needs going forward with it. Could we get by with the tower?
Yeah.
Certainly we could. Will the resale value be the same 10 years from now when it comes time to replace it with the truck that we're talking about today? No, it wouldn't be. And then the expense would be much greater at that time than it is now. And I think that was part of the thinking, is that with the resale value being higher now than later, it would make more sense knowing that at some point we're going to have to replace it, to take that step now.
If I could, Mr. Pearson, you bring up a great point, and I think, and the chief's doing a great job. The truth is, the truck is a beast, and when we were talking with Trap Fire Company months ago, they have an older ladder truck, and that needs to be replaced. Those sticks, and you have a picture of it. It's just a straight stick. It's much smaller. When they bought that tower, and there's plenty of towers around us, they're thinking Dow Chemical, Pfizer, but those buildings don't burn. Homes burn. And when the Trap Fire Company engine ladder pulls up, or the Royersford ladder pulls up, within minutes, that truck's in front of the house and the ladder's on the roof. The ladder tower can't do that this quickly. It's longer to set up. It's bigger to get in. The straight sticks are just more efficient. It's just the fire service, how it's evolved. Everybody wanted the big tower ladder 10 years ago, but they find that it's maybe not as useful as, and nimble as they need today.
I kind of understand.
And you get that.
I get that, Al, but my point is, it's like when you buy a Microsoft program, I'm just using that as an example, and something new comes along, oh, well, this just does a couple of more things. You know, am I just jumping on to the next item? I don't want to be jumping on to the next item because his budget is going to be substantial in the next couple of years. I mean, it's just going to grow exponentially, and I have to be concerned about where I'm spending my money, and maybe holding on to the piece of my $500,000 is, I don't
Well,
know.
I don't want to speak for the chief, but I think the point of purchasing this is actually a step back to a ladder that's more efficient, that the firefighters could drive on a daily basis, because that beast that's down at Black Rock is more difficult to drive. They could actually have a crew on that and drive around town and go to fires with that and be very efficient. And I think, and again, I don't want to speak for the chief or the fire department, but I think that's where they're going.
All right. Well, I won't get into too much of it tonight. It's like, I'll reserve my negative
Great
comments for
points,
some
like
other
we want to
time.
give back $1 million fire truck.
That's a
right?
$1 million truck.
Yeah,
I appreciate what you're saying, and again, I agree with you. I think that it's difficult when we sit down to spec any piece of equipment to make sure that we're speccing out for 10, 15, and even 20 years, how the township's going to evolve and how it's going to grow and where it's going to be, and sometimes we make mistakes.
Right now, I'm looking at a $13 million building. It's not the end of that, okay? I'm looking at a couple of other pieces of equipment, and now we're going to trade we're going to trade $1 million vehicle in for $500,000, or attempt to get $500,000 for it, because you don't know what that's going to bring you, to buy another vehicle. I have concerns about, where all that money's going to come from for your budget. I want to make sure that you have the equipment that you need, but I have some concerns about that. And I apologize, I'll save this for another time. Thank you.
Thank you.
good questions. That brings up it was the elephant in the room, really, so. Anybody have anything else? Anyone for the good of the order? Okay. I'll make a motion, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second it.
Okay, motion to adjourn accepted. Thank you.